The vacation was supposed to be a time of rest, a moment to escape the routine and catch my breath. But what happened on that beach made me question everything. My name is Terry, and believe me, you wouldn't want to be in my place that night. I arrived in the small coastal town on the recommendation of friends. An isolated beach with crystal clear waters and white sand, a true paradise. From the first day, I was enchanted by the simplicity and beauty of the place. The town, with its cobblestone streets and colorful houses, had a welcoming vibe, almost as if time moved differently there, slower, more tranquil. During the day, I explored every corner of that piece of paradise. I would wake up early, walk along the shore, and take a dip in the calm waters. I met some locals, friendly people always willing to share stories about the town. They told me that the beach had something special, something mystical that made people who visited always want to return. At night, the town came alive in a completely different way. The lights from bars and restaurants illuminated the streets, and the sound of laughter and music filled the air. I went to a few bars that my friends had recommended, places where live music mixed Latin rhythms with the sound of waves breaking in the background. I met people from different parts of the world, all there to enjoy a place that seemed like a dream. One of the nights, I ended up at a beach party, something improvised, but with an incredible energy. We danced around a bonfire, drinking and laughing until dawn. It was as if the entire town was in sync, moving to its own rhythm where time didn't matter. I was really enjoying that place. I felt that this vacation was exactly what I needed to recharge my energy. I was already thinking about coming back, maybe even bringing friends next time. But on the night before my departure, something happened. Something that would forever change the way I saw that place, turning the tranquility I had felt into pure terror. It was my last day. The sun had set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I decided to take one last walk along the beach, enjoying the gentle breeze and the sound of waves softly breaking on the shore. The full moon shone brightly, illuminating my path with a silver light. As I walked, the sound of the waves calmed me, but suddenly I felt a change in the air. The wind grew colder, and the sound of the waves began to sound different, as if they were whispering something I couldn't understand. I looked around and realized I was completely alone, but the feeling of being watched was undeniable. The beach, once a place of peace and beauty, suddenly became strange and threatening. I tried to ignore the discomfort, convincing myself it was just my mind playing tricks. But the feeling that something was wrong only intensified. I kept walking, but the beach seemed to stretch infinitely before me. And no matter how much I walked, I couldn't reach the spot where I knew the hotel was. That's when I saw something in the distance, a figure standing in the sand, watching me. It had no face, just a dark shadow, a void that seemed to suck all the light around it. My body froze, and fear took hold of me. I wanted to run, but my feet were stuck to the ground, as if the sand was holding me in place. The figure began to move toward me, and with each step it took, the world around me seemed to crumble. That beach, which had been the setting for the best vacation of my life, had now become a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. As the figure approached, I began to notice details that hadn't been clear before. Its form was indistinct, shifting between something human and something monstrous, as if its presence defied reality itself. The sand around it seemed to burn, as if its darkness was contaminating everything it touched. Each step it took left a trail of deep shadows, consuming the moonlight that had once illuminated the beach. The whispers that had once come from the waves were now louder, echoing in my mind, a cacophony of distorted, incoherent voices, as if the darkness itself was trying to consume me. The words were a mix of forgotten languages and inhuman sounds, and each syllable seemed to pierce my mind like a knife, tearing away pieces of my sanity. My senses began to fail. The smell of salt from the sea was replaced by a foul odor, something rotten, like decaying flesh. The air became heavy, almost impossible to breathe, and the metallic taste of blood filled my mouth, though I had no idea where it came from. Then, something even more horrifying happened. The figure, which until then had been just a formless shadow, began to transform. Its distorted contours gave way to a mass of pulsating flesh, a grotesque fusion of mutilated bodies, faces contorted in eternal pain, as if all the souls that had ever encountered this entity were trapped there forever. Empty eyes opened on various parts of its skin, each one glaring at me with an unfathomable hatred. I could no longer distinguish what was real. My vision blurred, and the world around me seemed to unravel, as if reality itself was being torn apart. The sound of the waves disappeared, replaced by the sound of tearing flesh, breaking bones, as if the figure was reconstructing itself and changing before me. And then the thing spoke. Its voice was not human. It was a guttural, deep sound reverberating through my entire being. It wasn't just a voice I heard, but one I felt inside me, vibrating in my bones, making me tremble with fear. The words it whispered in my mind were incomprehensible, but the meaning was clear. I was in its domain now, and there was no escape. Despair took hold of me, and I finally managed to move my feet, but it wasn't me controlling my body. I ran, or rather, I was dragged across the beach toward the sea. The sand, once soft and welcoming, was now cold and rough, cutting my feet like glass. The sea, which had once been a refuge, now seemed like an endless abyss, its waters black as pitch. When I reached the edge of the sea, I felt something grab my legs. I looked down and saw skeletal hands emerging from the sand, pulling me down, as if the very ground was alive and determined to drag me to hell. The figure was closer than ever, and its presence was unbearable, as if it was sucking the life out of me, piece by piece. In a final effort of desperation, I tried to scream, but no sound came from my throat. My lungs were burning, and the pressure in my chest was crushing. Everything around me began to spin, the sky and the sea merging into a vortex of darkness. And then everything stopped. The figure was right in front of me now, so close I could feel its cold, fetid breath. Its eyes, a sea of infinite darkness, stared at me with a hatred so deep it seemed to pierce my soul. I was completely powerless, at the mercy of this thing that shouldn't exist. In the last moment, before I completely lost consciousness, I heard a final whisper, a command that echoed through my entire being. You will never leave here. And then everything went black. I woke up at dawn, lying on the sand, the beach illuminated by the rising sun. Everything seemed to have returned to normal, but I knew something had changed. The marks on the sand around me, the cuts on my feet, and that persistent smell of decay assured me it wasn't just a dream. I left that place as quickly as I could, without looking back. But even now, as I write this, I feel I didn't truly escape. The smell still haunts me. The whispers still echo in my mind, and sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I feel that presence, watching, waiting for the right moment to claim me once and for all. I worked for years in an old metal factory on the outskirts of a small town in the interior of the state. It was an ancient place, with worn-out walls and machines that groaned as if they, too, felt the weight of time. The work was hard, but it paid the bills. I didn't have a choice. It was always the night shift that brought with it a different feeling. The factory, which during the day was just a noisy, dirty place, transformed into something much more sinister when the sun went down. The lights flickered, shadows seemed to stretch, and the sound of the machines blended with something alive. I remember one particular night when I started to realize I wasn't alone. Most of my colleagues avoided talking about it, but I could see the fear in their eyes. Some muttered about seeing shadows moving in the corners of the factory, always at the edge of their vision, as if watching us, studying us. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just fatigue or imagination. But that night, something changed. It was around 2 in the morning, and I was at the back of the factory, adjusting one of the machines. The place was unusually quiet, except for the rhythmic sound of the machinery. Then I felt a chill, like a cold breeze had passed by me, even though there were no open windows nearby. I lifted my head and out of the corner of my eye, saw a shadow move quickly along the wall. It was tall, slender, almost humanoid, but distorted, as if it didn't follow the normal rules of light and physics. My heart raced, and I felt sweat running down my back. I tried to convince myself it was just an optical illusion, a lighting glitch, but then I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. Footsteps, heavy and slow, echoing down the hallway. I stopped what I was doing and turned slowly, expecting to see one of my coworkers. But there was no one there. The footsteps continued, getting closer, but the hallway was empty. I felt my stomach churn with fear, and my mind scrambled to find a rational explanation. Maybe some animal had gotten into the factory, or some metal part was falling, but I couldn't fool myself. Suddenly, the lights began flickering violently, plunging the place into intermittent darkness. And it was in that game of lights and shadows that I saw it. The shadow, clearer now, stood at the end of the hallway. It was tall, taller than anyone I knew, and it seemed to be looking directly at me, even though it had no eyes. When those lights started flickering, something inside me knew it wasn't just an electrical problem. The factory, with its thick walls and old machines, seemed to breathe, as if it were alive. The sound of that thing's footsteps, getting closer and closer, wasn't just a noise. It was a sentence. My thoughts were in chaos, but my body acted on pure instinct, a desperate attempt to survive. As I ran, I felt the air around me grow heavy, almost tangible. It was as if the very environment was trying to suffocate me, as if every step I took was against an invisible force that wanted to pull me back towards that shadow. My breath was so fast and ragged that my chest hurt, but the adrenaline pushed me forward. My feet barely touched the ground, moving at a speed I didn't even know I had. The lights, once intermittent, went out all at once, plunging everything into darkness. And it was in that blackness that I felt something horrible. That shadow, that being was right behind me, so close I could almost feel its icy breath on my neck. It wasn't a normal cold. It was a cold that seemed to drain the life out of me, that penetrated my soul and filled my mind with terrible thoughts. Time seemed to warp, each second stretching into minutes as I ran through that labyrinth of metal and darkness. When I reached the control room, I slammed the door shut and locked it with everything I could find. It was a small room, crowded with monitors and old control panels. The smell of oil and metal filled the air, but that was the least of my worries. The thing outside stopped. The silence was overwhelming, so much so that I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. The darkness of the hallway seemed to try to invade the room, as if the shadow was there on the other side of the door, waiting for the right moment to enter. I sat on the floor with my back pressed against the door, trying to control my breathing. Every second, I expected to hear a sound, a scratch on the door, a sinister sigh, anything to indicate that it was still there. But nothing came. I stayed there for hours, or what felt like hours, unable to move, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would explode. When the sun finally began to rise, the darkness in the factory seemed to retreat, as if it had lost its power. The first rays of light entered through the dusty windows, and a sense of safety, fragile but real, began to form in me. I waited until the sun was higher in the sky before finally getting up. My legs were trembling, and my movements were automatic, as if my mind was still somewhere else, trapped in that room with that thing outside. When I left, the factory seemed as ordinary as ever, but I knew I would never see it the same way again. I quickly grabbed my things and left without looking back. At that moment, I decided I would never return to the night shift. I requested a transfer to the day shift, using any excuse that came to mind, and to my surprise, the supervisor didn't even question it. It seemed like he knew. Maybe everyone knew, but no one had the courage to speak up. I spent weeks trying to rationalize what happened, trying to convince myself it was just a hallucination, a mix of exhaustion and imagination. But no matter how many times I tried, that shadow, that cold, and that feeling of being hunted never left me. The nights at home became torturous. I barely slept, always expecting the darkness to somehow reach me there too. Eventually, I quit my job. I moved to a different town and tried to start over, but the memory of that night still haunts me. Somewhere deep down, I know that shadow is still there, in the darkness of the factory, waiting for another unprepared soul to get lost in the corridors. And I can only hope I never have to look at the face, if it can be called a face, of what chased me. I never told anyone the truth, and honestly, I don't think I ever will. No one would believe it, and as much as I want to forget, I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see that shadow, feel that cold, and hear those footsteps echoing in the dark corridors. Even now, as I write this, I feel a chill, as if I'm being watched. Maybe it's just my mind playing tricks on me, or maybe, just maybe, it never really let me escape.